So for almost the entire history of comic publishing, the advice has always been the same. Get noticed by a small publisher, or self-publish, get noticed by a small publisher, get published by the small publisher, get noticed by one of the big two, published by the big two, never self-publish again. But an increasing number of creators are now finding success with self-published art, with self-publishing, and instead of eschewing it for the colorful spandex-clad waters of multinational conglomerates, they're choosing to continue to forge their own path. In 1977, a deeply personal project called ElfQuest was born. As the first continuing fantasy adventure graphic novel series in America to be co-created, written, and illustrated by a woman, Wendy and Richard Pini's ElfQuest became a phenomenon in the comics industry, appealing to comics and sci-fi fantasy fans alike. It attracted a unique and unprecedented audience, an equal mix of male and female readers. Over 3 million copies of collected graphic novel volumes have been sold to date, as well as become the subject of Peter David's tattoo. In 1991, Jeff Smith's Bones sent shockwaves through the comic book industry. This black and white self-published book, which defied genre, put the big two on notice that there was a viable alternative to their stranglehold in the comics industry. Bone has gone on to garner a host of accolades, including 2 NCS Division Awards for Best Comic Book, 10 Eisner Awards, and 11 Harvey Awards, and Alpha Art for Best Foreign Book in Angela in France, as well as being chosen to launch the first graphic novel imprint for children by Scholastic in 2005. In September of 2013, Smith released his most recent graphic novel, a hard-boiled science fiction epic titled Razzle. Also that fall, a new webcomic was launched about the first human to leave Africa 2 million years ago, called Tuki Save the Humans. After becoming increasingly frustrated with the mistreatments of creators at the hands of corporate comic companies, Chris Roberson and Allison Baker launched Monkeybrain Comics in the summer of 2012. Monkeybrain Comics was designed to be a home for quality, creator-owned comics made available in digital format on Comixology. The Onion AV Club has named Monkeybrain Comics the premier destination for high-quality digital comics, and IGN has said that Monkeybrain is the company that seems to be doing digital comics best. Chris writes and self-publishes the monthly comic, Edison Rex. Last but not least, Becky Cloonan has been self-publishing comics since 1999. What started out as Xeroxed hand-stapled books given away at conventions has morphed into beautiful silkscreen books which are sought after by collectors. In 2013, Becky's self-published book, The Mire, won the Eisner Award for Best Single Issue. More importantly, at least for purposes of this panel, it brought the phrase self-publish or perish to the forefront and began a renewed discussion about the role of self-publishing as a goal in its own right, instead of as the starting point on a path to something bigger. Becky's self-published graphic novel, By Chance or Providence, collecting the Wolves, the Mire, and Demeter, is out in April. So, this is self-publish or perish. So, self-publish or perish, that's a pretty bold statement. It's kind of like give me liberty or give me death. Why is self-publishing such an imperative? Becky, you want to start us off since you...
Well, I was just riffing on the publish or perish. I think it's not there, but really that was with, at the time when I did Wolves, I was feeling a little, desperate, I think. I was doing a lot of licensed work, and it's not bad, it's not, I wasn't making money, and I was enjoying the books that I was doing, but at the same time I was like, I'm not, I just feel like I'm struggling, I'm constantly chasing work that it's not me, not telling me stories. And so Wolves was kind of just one of those things where I was like, okay, I gotta write something of my own, but I'm nervous and haven't written in years, and I just gotta do it, put it out there, and make 1,000 copies and see what happens. And that's kind of where it came from. But it was kind of like a desperation. It's like this last-ditch effort. What else am I going to do? Am I just going to keep on doing licensed characters forever? It's not like I feel bad complaining about it because a lot of people would. I think I was in a bad position, but it wasn't the best. It was a little. I was waiting for, waiting on projects and being given projects that I wasn't. My heart wasn't in it. You know what I mean? It was just kind of sad. It's just a little sad. Yeah, so that's why I started self-publishing again. And before that, a few years before, I did a book called 5 with Bobby That won an Eisner for Best Anthology, and we self-published that. And it's like, next week we did another one, and like Dark Horse picked that up and did a little hardcover version of it. So it's been something that I've been doing like with friends like all the time, but this was the first time when I was like, okay, I gotta seriously do something about this instead of just treating it like, you know, something fun to do with friends. Like actually sit down and try to self-publish and try to figure it out.
So feel free to chime in, everybody. This, I mean,
Yeah,
because
I feel like I'm just gonna keep talking and it's just gonna get awkward.
self-publishing is a, I mean, it's a part of all of your careers, and it continues to be an important part of it. Why? Why self-publish? Why stick with this when you all have opportunities in front of you, with the big two or with other companies? So why keep self-publishing?
Well, my wife, Alice, and I put together Monkeybrain originally just to be a platform for me to do my own comics. Myself and my collaborators. But once we built it, we realized it could work for other people as well, and so we just opened it up to our friends. And they were foolish enough to go along with it. But it really was born out of the frustrations of a lot of that same kind of stuff, like waiting on other people to make decisions. I was tired of having to ask permission to do the story I wanted to do. You know, I have now done creator-owned work pretty much at everywhere that does creator-owned work, I think. Right? No, I didn't do it at Dark Horse. I've done licensed work at Dark Horse. Anyway, but the point is that, like, in almost every case, you're having to get your story past somebody. Rather than just doing the story you wanted to do, you had to, like, the best version of the thing you wanted to do that you could get an editor to agree to. Or they, you know, and once they're paying for it, there's that whole thing where, like, you know, it doesn't sell well enough, you don't want to do it anymore. And so self-publishing was just an additional option. And this way I could do the projects I want to do, and no one can tell me no. Well, my wife can't, but I don't know. And we can keep doing it as long as we want. And give it an opportunity to build an audience over time. Because there's the brutal cruelties of the way the market works. Like, if the book doesn't launch huge, it's dead inside of 6 months. I've done that several times. It's been lots of fun. Yeah. So I'm not doctrinaire that self-publishing is the only way, but like it needs to be an option. And with digital, particularly like Comixology Submit, anybody can do it. There's not even a financial risk involved.
It's really not a binary either-or kind of thing. When we started, and just listening to the history here tonight, I feel like one of the fossil founders of this whole thing. We actually started out not wanting to self-publish for 2 reasons, at least 2. 1, we had no clue. 2, the myth that you opened up the panel with, that you get noticed by somebody who's willing to do that grunt work for you. You be creative, but then somebody writes you the fat check every month. I mean, that was what we thought publishing was all about, whether it's book publishing or comic book publishing or anything. And we wanted to do that. We wanted to create ElfQuest and have somebody pay us for the privilege. Didn't work that way. All of the companies that we took ElfQuest to said, this is too strange for us. So it really became a matter of like the little red hen baking the bread. We ended up having to do it ourselves. But, as Chris has pointed out, the world has changed so much now that we still consider ourselves independent publishers, but independent does not mean isolated for us. We're now doing ElfQuest through Dark Horse and having a wonderful time. We have been with DC, we have been with Marvel. We're the promiscuous property of independent comics. But at the same time, there are other projects that we have wanted to do that haven't gone that route. Wendy has created her adaptation of Mask of the Red Death. That's solely an independently published project. And nobody has told us what to do. And it's doing well, but it's exactly the way we want to do it under our own terms. If somebody comes up to us and says something very nice, and we all agree, maybe it'll go to some else in partnership, not ownership. Partnership the entire time. It's never ownership. It's an option. We don't sell. But that's how we came to it. So we're doing this dance between independence and partnership, and it feels right to do, because it's not black and white. One voice
Thanks for coming.
So Jeff, to get you to join in the conversation, you came into comics about 15 years after ElfQuest in the early 90s, and this was a really exciting time for comics. This is about the time that Image split off. Where was your thought on when you were bringing Bone out?
Image hadn't split off yet. They
Right.
split off like about 2 years after I started Bone. But ElfQuest was out there. Cerebus, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had made quite a hullabaloo. In the late 80s, there was even because of the Turtles and ElfQuest and Cerebus, there was a huge what they call a boom, and everybody was doing a black and white comic. And the direct market was there to kind of allow that to happen, which was kind of exciting. But it was the kind of a boom that there wasn't a lot of talent behind it. It wasn't, these people weren't doing ElfQuest and they weren't doing even the Turtles. It was just a lot of stuff. I didn't know that. I thought that the market was, I went to a bank and said, I want to do this just like these other black and white comics, and I'm going to make $1 million like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And the banker looked at it and said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Gave me some money. But then it busted. And when I started trying to sell Bone in 1991, pretty much nobody wanted to buy a black and white comic anymore. That heyday had passed. Fortunately, I didn't realize that, and I just plowed right ahead. And just like everybody else in this panel, I started off self-publishing because I couldn't sell Bone. I tried to sell it as a newspaper comic strip. I couldn't find a syndicate that was interested in it. I mean, they were interested, but only if I changed some things, and I definitely wouldn't be able to own it. Just like Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson didn't own the copyright to Calvin and Hobbes. It was one of the reasons he was unhappy and quit. But once I got going and discovered how much fun comic books were to work in as an art form, I was trying to do little strips, those little 4 boxes like a Garfield comic. And all of a sudden I was dealing with comic books, which were this almost infinite canvas, as many panels as you wanted to set up the joke. I really got excited about the art form. I really got interested in the market. And as Chris suggested, I found the most important part about self-publishing was controlling your work. If I wanted to do a collection of the book, I could do it, and if I wanted to keep it in print, I could do it. So even someone who was creator-friendly, and I used to get in arguments with Gary Roth about this, we'd get angry when I would do interviews and say, well, I want to do it because I can control no amount of work. And he would actually call me and say, I do not own, the Hernandez brothers' work. And he says, I'm cool. I said, yeah, but Gary, but if you decide if it's going to get published, and if you decide if it's going to get put back into print, I could just do that. I could just get it back into print. And there was a couple of times when Bone had an ebb and flow over 12 years where I would do, I think like the 7th book didn't do very well. I mean, it didn't sell that many copies, but I wasn't going to let it go out of print. I sucked it up and kept it going, and because I knew eventually it would all make sense when it was one big book, and that panned out. So I always felt like controlling your work was a big part of it, and it's one of the only places where you can really be an author, I think. So that someone like Becky, she's writing it and drawing it, and it's her vision. That's what you get. And that's like a cartoonist being an author. And I see that, there's other places where that happens, but I really see it in the self-published underground quadrant. All right, I'll leave now. Is there any water for us? My mouth is super Yeah, I shouldn't have smoked so much pot before I got up here.
There's candy here. You're feeling munchy.
Yeah, I know. Is that, okay?
We got a question.
We got questions. There's a microphone right over there on the left, if you all would like.
Maybe his mic.
Well,
Yep, yours is.
I'm working. You have to get intimate.
During you guys talking about the black and white comics in a way, I was wondering, it's not kind of related, but it's the same thing, style of manga. Manga has always been black and white. And I was wondering, curious obviously about the manga style, like, because I know ElfQuest is kind of style like manga, kind of novel style. So how did that work out too? The manga also was Dark Horse, isn't it?
Well, ElfQuest has the distinction of being the first manga-influenced fantasy series in America. Back in the early 60s, I was probably America's only raving otaku. Because I happened to discover a movie that was partially directed by Osamu Tezuka called Alakazam the Great, which was really the retelling of the Way West, the ancient Chinese myth, the Way West. And right now it's being retold as Dragon Ball Z. So I went quietly mad when I discovered that there was another way besides Disney to do an animated film. And my first love was animation. And then little by little, people began to introduce me to manga. The manga fandom back in the late 60s on through the 70s was very small, and it was very hard to obtain this kind of material unless you could get yourself to Little Tokyo or Japantown or had friends overseas who could send you some. And so little by little, I just began to absorb the influence of this storytelling style. And it was so powerful because the drawing style was normally so delicate, and there was a feminine quality to it, and yet the line work was so strong, and such awful things happened in manga. I mean, you have these adorable big-eyed characters, especially the ones that Tezuka created, and there wasn't an awful thing Tezuka could think of that he didn't do to his characters. He was a cruel, cruel god. And, and I was absolutely obsessed by this because the high contrast of it was thrilling, that you could do an aesthetically beautiful character and just put them through hell, put them through all kinds of drama. It was just, that's kind of what sent me off. And when we sat down and talked about doing ElfQuest, there was no question in my mind that when we agreed on and arrived on the decision to do it as a comic rather than as a prose novel or as a screenplay or other things we considered, there was no question in my mind that I was going to use the influences that I had learned, especially from Tezuka, about storytelling, and that ElfQuest, even though it was going to be drawn in a manner that didn't look like anything else out there, because back in the 70s, the comics industry was absolutely not used to the look of manga. And for a while, for the first few issues of ElfQuest that came out, we were looked at askance by the comics industry. Like, what is this? The guys look like girls, everybody has long hair, it's too emotional. How do we deal with this? Comics are supposed to be about superheroes. This is too feminine, it's too this, it's too that. So the reactions to ElfQuest were kind of mixed from the comics industry, but the fans, the people who had been waiting for it, and the manga fans that did exist at the time, and the fantasy fans and sci-fi fans, they're the ones that took to it and really got us launched. So that is the story of how manga influence started in ElfQuest. And who would have thought that in the 90s there would be this huge explosion on TV? I think it was actually started by Dragon Ball Z, and now the anime look is taken for granted in comics, and just about everybody is influenced by it. So ElfQuest was kind of about 20 years ahead of its time.
Yeah. Thank you.
as an art form, but as a literary, where you're following more than just the regular Spider-Man or the independent that was based off Spider-Man or something like that. But how do you think it would, manga and anime, have influenced the writing styles? I know you talked about having long hair, but that's more of a visual aspect. But like what they go out to do.
Well, I hope you don't mind me speaking again, but the Japanese don't, in my opinion, really see much difference between methods of telling a story, and their goal is to tell a story in a powerful way. And Death Note happens to be a beautifully organized story, and I think I like to think that what I'm seeing in American independent comics is this goal to tell a story beautifully. I think there's much more focus on story in independent comics than there is in the big, the bigger companies that have to kind of keep a mythology going, but at the same time they can't advance it too much, because then their characters won't match their brand anymore. So Spider-Man can't do anything too much out of character for Spider-Man, whereas with manga, and this is something I personally learned from the Japanese, they don't mind growing their characters older, they don't mind giving them huge changes in their lifestyles, they don't mind killing them, and that's a much more satisfying read, and I think you see a lot more of that in independence than you do in the mainstream.
And this is my last question before I leave. My question is for you, Becky, about art styles. I see you're kind of scribbling around, but one of my favorite animators is Miyazaki, and he was talking about like a couple of months back where Japanese manga and anime have kind of almost turned into the Western, where it has almost this same style where it keeps on going. Not every manga, but the ones that are kind of blasé keep on having the same art style, one after another. If it's not too cheesecakey, it's either way. I forgot how he voiced it, but basically it was fanboy service and manga and anime.
Well, if I could just jump in for a second, I would have to say, just point out that most manga is not self-published.
Yeah.
In fact, almost none of it is. And in fact, most manga is, when you use the term blasé there, a lot of it is churned out by the same kind of factory line system, assembly line system that we have at Marvel and DC. There's big, giant publishing houses like Kodansha and these other ones the editors are the kings, just like at Marvel and DC.
Like if a character's really popular, they'll be like, just do more of that character.
Yeah.
The artist may not even have to say.
Yeah, and that's not 100% true, of course, and that's not 100% true at Marvel and DC either. But as a general rule, when I look at the field of comics, I think of Marvel, DC, and manga as about the same thing. Yeah, there's different styles, but they're not that good. They're not that good.
A few years ago, in like 2009, I was at a convention in Japan called Komitsu, and it's an independent comic convention there. And it was really funny because everyone's, it's like a one-day thing, 5 hours long. You go, you set up, and it's like, everyone there is like, oh, I'm a banker, or I work at like a cafe, or I, make sushi. But on the side, they all kind of make these little comics.
They're doujinshi.
Well, no, they're not, because they're not fan comics. They were like independent.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it was really crazy. And to see that like completely out of the mainstream, one girl was like, oh, I'm obsessed with Ireland. And it was really funny because then I saw her like a year later in England at a convention. She's like, I find an Irish guy. And I was like, oh, yeah. All right. And so it just ended up being really funny because it's independent. It's the same thing that we're doing here, but it's like, out of the mainstream to see that over there. Because, I guess when I first got into manga, it was like subversive because it was different, and it really spoke to me on a different level. It's like,
They go places.
Yeah, and
They don't go here.
there's a lot of women who, work in the comic market. When I started drawing comics in high school, there was like, you know, I can count the number, you know, Jill Thompson, Colleen Duran. You know, there was very few when I was in high school for women to look up to who were doing comics. And when I started getting into manga, I was like, oh, so this is something I can do. And, you know, it's an accessible style for me. You know, I can't draw originally, but I look at Rumiko Takahashi and I was like, there's something there that, you know, speaks to me. So I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, manga and the independent stuff, it's weird because for them, in their perspective, like mainstream, it might be their like big two, quote unquote. But for us, it's different. You know? I don't know. Is that, what were we talking about? I know.
You certainly stand here as a testament to the success of self-publishing and the liberation that you find within, but as a cautionary tale to those who would do the same, what are the greatest pitfalls that you've found in self-publishing, and what, if any, are there any detraction to that? I mean, if I...
Boy, where do you start? I mean, it's a very difficult way to make a living. I mean, it's very hard.
You know, we come from old school, and we've been dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century, because when we started, it was all paper and print. There was no internet, there was no, you know, there was no digital, there was none of that. So the pleasures and the pitfalls were intimately linked. The pleasures were you had complete control. You did what you wanted. You were your own boss, you made your own hours, you made your own rules. If you were a success, you owned it. But you had to get your vision out there however you could, and the avenues for that were quite a bit more limited than they are today. On the other hand, the distribution system was a lot more robust then than it is now, the direct market. When we got started, the playing field was almost empty, so we caught lightning in a bottle, we admit it. But if you didn't make that cut, you were completely on your own. You know, all the success was yours, all the failure was yours. It's very, very heady if you're a responsible, committed person. Now, I would guess, and anybody else, please amend or correct, the channels of getting your work out there are infinite. But because there are infinite channels, they are fragmented infinitely. You're competing with 1 million other people instead of 10 other people for the eyeballs of whoever is on the other side of the monitor screen.
And of course, today's attention span is, you know, that of a gnat.
Well, so the pitfalls are a lot less today in terms of nuts and bolts kinds of things. You can go home, you can create a comic, however you do it, paper and then scan it or digitally with a tablet or whatever. Your cost to do this is essentially nothing. It's your time, and whatever that's worth to you. That's attractive. That's a plus. On the other hand, everybody's got a printing press. So you have to be very diligent and committed to make sure that your voice is not only good, but is heard over and over and over and over and over again, so that it rises above the general babble, the white noise of everything else that's out there. That's my 2 cents on that, and I'm sure others have more to say.
My question sort of ties into that. My daughter is one that's interested in publishing something. She's got this mind-boggling story that probably will turn the world upside down someday. But anyways, the point is this. There's some things that are missing, like you guys are talking, that I sort of don't understand when it comes to self-publishing. Jeff was talking about you went to the bank and you got a loan, or asked for a loan for something that didn't quite pan out. I don't know if I understood that right. And then, but you kept pushing
planned for the story, I had a plan for the book, and I talked it over with my wife. I laid out, I didn't know how long it would be exactly, but I knew that it would take me, years to tell the story, and it would have an actual ending, and I had it, loosely mapped out. And the part I think I didn't bother to really say is that you need to have a plan. You have to actually understand what you're doing. You don't just draw a comic. If you're going to self-publish, you have to actually sell it and promote it and have a plan. And I would, the simplest thing to suggest would be to go online and get a template for a business plan. And it'll tell you how to fill out the business plan and what kind of problems you're going to probably need to anticipate. How much is it going to cost you to get this? How long will it take you to get money back from the distributors? It'll force you to ask these questions. That's a very simple way of looking at it. It's obviously more complicated.
So very briefly, I'll give you an example. If I want to be a lawnmower, in order to be a lawnmower, I have to buy a lawnmower, turn it on, push it, mow the lawn. That's how you become a lawnmower.
Right.
So if 4 bullet points like that, what would be the 4 steps that would get me from point A to point C?
You actually missed a very important bullet point in your analogy. You want to be a lawnmower, yeah, you need the equipment, you need the legs, you need the gasoline, you need this. You need to get customers.
Yes, but that's what I mentioned. How do you guys went from not having a customer to say, okay, this is my first customer? What did you do? Did you talk to somebody personally, or did you just put it out?
In our case, and this, I don't think this could happen in this day and age, but in our case, we were extraordinarily lucky to know 2 powerful distributors, one on the East Coast, Phil Cloonan, and one on the West Coast, Bud Plant, both of whom were friends of ours and knew me prior as a science fiction and fantasy illustrator for Galaxy and F magazines. So I had a reputation, I had a name. So we did something absolutely idiotic for them, for those times, which is our first print run of ElfQuest was 10,000 copies. Wow. Which back then, but because Phil and Bud both knew us, knew me, knew my work, trusted it, between the 2 of them, they took all 10,000 copies, and they sold out within
So I think that's a
months.
great, wonderful bullet point. So you would say that being part of it, of the industry, would help a lot. You find the industry first.
There's a saying, and it's in every business. It's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know. Now, back then, we knew these 2 distributors. They were the first 2 distributors to the direct market. The direct market now is under the control of one distributor. It is essentially a monopoly, and to try to break into that is very, very difficult if you're talking about paper and print. I would suggest that the analogous situation with regard to digital, with regard to the web, which you said earlier, your cost to get into there is nothing but your time and your talent. But when we relaunched ElfQuest recently, we were fortunate in that one of our fans happened to be an editor at Boing Boing, which is one of the biggest blog news, whatever you call them these days. And he said, can we post your stuff online? And we were very happy about that. I would suggest the similar thing is to get to know people who are in a position online to give you a hand up if you're doing digital. I'm the worst person in this room to be talking about this because there are so many more people out there who know what I don't know what Twitter's about. I don't know. Facebook was the last big leap I took.
You need to learn the industry. You need to know what you're doing. I mean, the questions you're asking, there's no way we can really explain them as bullet points to you. But what you can do is or your daughter, well, what I did at the time, it was all print, but there were trade magazines. There was Wizard and the Comics Journal and the Comics Buyer's Guide, and I subscribed to them all. I read them all every time those comic books came out from cover to cover, and I started to learn names, I started to learn about the industry and who was doing things, and and things like that. And you could do that. There are still trade journals. Are there still trade journals?
There
Not
are.
really anymore.
But it's all the CBRs and the bleeding cools.
Yeah, okay, so the equivalent would be the comics, the pages that talk about comics, like Comics Alliance or CBR or Comics Reporter or something like that. There are pages,
Or read my wife's column on CBR.
Your answers are perfect, beautiful. I mean, they're telling me exactly what she needs to do.
I'm gonna actually disagree with everything that was just said. With all due respect, because you guys are awesome and I love your work. I don't care about the direct market. I mean, the direct market is great. It's cool. It's where I make my living, as paltry as it is. But for people starting out now, for kids now, anybody with a Tumblr account is a self-publisher. Just make a comic and put it online.
That's like the hardest part, isn't it?
Putting it online.
Making the comic.
Well, yeah, actually, first don't suck, and then just put it online. I think you were rattled off a bunch of names, whether it's Kate Beaton or Lucy Nisley, whose name I always mispronounce, or Aaron Diaz, who does Dresden Kodak. People have built careers just posting stuff for free online. Just do it. There's no secret key anymore.
In deference to what you just said, I hope nobody heard what we were saying as a recommendation that you try to start through the direct market.
Yeah.
Because these days, you might as well just slit your wrists and
It's fast.
going online and getting to know the online community and the online business community makes much more sense.
I'm curious though, aren't people like Kate Beaton, they're really making money now that they've actually entered back into the print world? Not necessarily the direct market, but like through books and stuff.
You build your audience.
On like advertising, and they have the
On
whole
her
Topatico
site?
thing.
On her site?
Yeah, on her
It's
site.
selling like calendars and
Huh?
And they set up that big Topatico website that's like, all webcomic, like Ryan North and Scott Seed, like all these guys, they sell all their merch to this big, it's circumnavigated everything.
And the thing is, they don't really have a presence in the direct market. I mean,
Well, I wasn't suggesting you go to the direct market either. I was trying to draw out a coolness with my experience, that's all.
But you guys gave me some great answers, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm just kind of a large, potentially theoretical question. I'm asking about self-publishing that is not necessarily from an individual or just a pair, particularly where it pertains to like multimedia or cross-media productions. I know it's happened a lot in terms of indie filmmaking. You get groups together, they're going to make something, they're going to produce it. But where have you seen success in like small groups, collectives of half a dozen or more people who are writing a project together and who are
that's what he was just talking about. Yeah, the thing that Becky just mentioned is a consortium of people, and they're all doing their own projects, but they're kind of pooling their resources. And there's a really smart guy named George Rohack who used to be at Oni. Yeah, he's got basically like that's what he does now for a living. Is kind of put those kinds of bands together.
So what does that mean for like ownership or whatever it is?
Well, but in these cases, they're not collaborating as such. They're collaborating with businesses and things.
Okay.
It's more like merchandising and, selling coffee mugs or t-shirts or something based on the comic that you make when you from like your site.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any kind of historical question a little bit. If you had any stories about when you first started, did you ever print up a bunch of copies, get a table at a convention and just sit there and sell them and talk to people? Was that part of the equation or totally went a different direction?
When I started going to cons, I never got a table because I was like, what's the point? Because no one knew who I was. So I would just go and kind of go up to people's tables and bring my book to them and try to meet other artists and writers that way. started.
We never had that consideration because, as Wendy has pointed out, we had a couple of distributors who were willing to gamble on us from the get-go. And these days, trying to get a table at a convention, I mean, even if it's a free table in Artist's Alley or something, there are so many people vying for that space anymore. I mean, you know, the con is sold out months before it even opens up, and the tables are gone months before.
But there are different kinds of conventions, though.
That's true.
There's Mocha, and there's Staple, and well, some towns have been rolled into Rose City, but there's a whole culture where there's these little zine fests and little self-published things and art shows all over every weekend. There's something going on somewhere.
Something we probably don't know.
Yeah, I used this analogy earlier. Scott McCloud had said something like the comics community has grown so large that parts of it have receded over the horizon and can't be seen by each other. So it's when people talk about how do you break in comics, start doing comics, like what kind you want to do.
Yeah. I remember being at San Diego winter and I was talking to some webcomic guys. And they're like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I'm doing a book like an ongoing for Vertigo. And they're like, what's Vertigo? And I was like, okay, it just shows how far removed. And they're like, they're bigger names than I am. You know, but they're on a totally different spectrum of what I
had that exact conversation
it's
with
crazy.
somebody.
It was like mind-blowing.
Last spring in a career, I'm looking Vertigo, and I had this conversation with San Diego, and I was like, oh, like, this is not here.
Yeah.
These people don't, not only do they have to know who I am.
These webcomic people.
Yeah.
No,
it's totally racist.
It just goes to show, it's like, there's no real way to break into comics, and you can't just say like, oh, here's the bullet list of things you have to do. It's like, it depends on where you are in your career. Are you making comics to meet other creators doing comics? Are you making comics to try and, get your name out there to get, maybe a deal with, Vertigo or with Dark Horse, or you...
That's the one wonderful thing about the fact that we live in such an age of way too much information, but if you narrow your search, you can find the answers to any kind of question that you want. If you decide, no, I want to break into print independent comics, I want to break into web comics, I want to do this, I want to do that, somewhere on the interwebs, there are going to be people who are doing what you say you want to do, and you search them out, and you introduce yourself to them, and you talk with them, and you learn from them, you do this, and there's going to be an answer, no matter how absurd or insane you think your own idea is. You're going to find others who want to do the same thing, or have done the same thing, are doing the same thing. That's a big plus in this incredibly fragmented, over-the-horizon industry in which we live.
But I do want to jump in and say that this is why I think comic conventions are valuable and will always be valuable. Because if you are diligent enough, if you are determined enough to want to either meet your heroes, artists and writers who are mentors to you that you look up to and you want to learn from them, and if you stick to it, you can actually meet these folks in person and have
and be pals with them.
And be pals
and
with
be
them.
in their book clubs.
Yeah.
Just buy them beers.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't stress too strongly, at least in my own life, how important it was to me to have time with Jack Kirby, who was one of my first mentors. And even though he felt that comics was not an appropriate profession for a young woman, and he told me that if he ever caught me working in comics, he would give me a spanking. And I tried to hold him to it every time I saw him. But Jack was my first mentor, and I learned so much from his drawing style, and we had really, really interesting conversations, and I met other people through him, and eventually started participating on panels in comics with people who used to be my idols, like Neil Adams and John Buscema, and all of a sudden I was up there on panels with them, and so was Richard, and so you can meet people in the industry who you can learn so much from, and you can only do that one-on-one in person, and that's why I think...
Or on Twitter.
Well, stop.
It's true.
Stop.
It's true.
Stop. You're not really meeting the person person. You're not having what they call FaceTime.
That's what the iPhone is for.
You know, I can't tell you how many people come up to Richard and me at various conventions and they say, I met you 20 years ago and you gave me this advice and now I'm doing my own comic. And they hand us the comic and we go, oh my God, you know. I mean, just that you had a little something to do with someone's career.
I think on the other side of that, though, like, you know, I had one of my most formative moments creatively was a weekend at a Dallas Fantasy Fair that I spent following Matt Wagner around in 1989. And now I'm in his book club. And like that was one of the most important things that happened to me was just asking him, like, how are you doing this? What do you do? Like, how does it work? And when I met him as a professional and adult, of course he doesn't remember at all. But like, you know, I've got hanging on the wall the sketch I brought him. And when he came over to my house for dinner, I was like, you did that for me. And it was a momentary blip in his otherwise stunning weekend. Yeah.
Well, you know, it really boils down to one of my favorite sayings is model yourself after success. If you yearn for a certain kind of success, if you have a certain kind of story to tell, and you have a vision that is unique, find someone out there or a number of someones who are successful at doing something similar to what you're doing and learn from them. Find out how they did it. Yeah.
And buy them beer.
We got another question over here.
I just wanted to, because we've got like a whole spectrum of the history of self-publishing up here. It seems like it's gone from like a new option to like almost more like a punk aesthetic, like a do-it-yourself, you know, and even a sort of a certain element of rebellion to maybe something now that's a bit more almost artisanal. Like there's kind of a defined like this is my flavor, only mine, which is nice. I'd like to hear from the panel how they sort of see themselves now in self-publishing and how they saw themselves when they were starting in self-publishing in that kind of, in that aesthetic of self-publishing.
I have a theory about this, and I think that what you see represented here are three different waves of self-publishing, and I think that what happens is whenever there's any kind of like upset or crisis in the market, it creates opportunity. And so when the newsstand died hard in the late 70s and the direct market kind of took over, people like it was an unclear landscape. It wasn't like obvious what was going to happen. And so, you know, you guys were trailblazing, but also like small publishers, independent publishers like, you know, First and Pacific, and Kamiko, like found ecological niches that didn't exist before then. And then the domination of Diamond in the 90s and the formation of Image and stuff like that created another opportunity because no one was really sure what was going to happen next. And so that kind of like, there was a culture that was very like self-consciously, we're going to do self-publishing as a like almost political statement. And now the rise of digital and the kind of like, not the slow decline of the direct market, but the direct market is kind of like calcified a little bit in terms of what size it is and what it does. Again, creates opportunity. So I think less in terms of like the philosophy behind it and just like, there's the opportunity here to do cool new stuff. And every time that happens, self-publishing is one of the things that comes out of that.
We have never, in our 36 years, thought in those terms. At rock bottom, we're storytellers. We got a story, we want to get it out to the readers, to the audience. And whatever the, as you say, whatever the opportunities, whatever the options were available to us at the time, we would explore them and we would do the best we knew how to do with the tools and the opportunities that we had. We're still doing that. As I said at the very beginning of this, we're independent, we're not isolated. Dark Horse is a tool. We've licensed ElfQuest to them for the new series. We're also still doing stuff on our own. Whatever it takes for us to get what's in here, out there, that's what we're going to do.
That's really well put. I had a story I wanted to tell. I didn't think it was. I thought more people would like it than were able to see it in the comic book marketplace. And it was just whatever it took to get it out there, get into new venues, or, you know, or if Diamond or Capital, the distributors were trying to like clamp down on the self-publishers or whatever they were doing, we would fight. We were like, I don't know, like a mother tiger protecting its cubs. I mean, we didn't take shit from anybody. And we were very political, and they were trying to close doors around us. And just like Richard just said, at any opportunity we saw to get what we wanted, we would run. We would, if there was a hole somewhere, we'd run through it. You know, like, oops, they made a mistake there. So it's just, I think a little bit is, you know, you've got this story, you need to get out, you've got this fire in your belly, you're going to get it done. And you've got to go to comic book shows, you've already started doing that. If you go to, I heard a lot of really good advice over the course of this talk. Small press shows like SBX or MoCA or APE, go to those shows. And if you go to those shows, you're going to hang out afterward with people, you're going to be next to people, you're going to talk, you're going to exchange ideas, exchange war stories. If you're doing a web comic, you can talk to other people who are doing web comics. If you see Becky, definitely buy her beer. Yeah?
I agree.
I agree.
On that buy a beer note, I think we are just about out of time. So if you liked what you heard here, if you want to support these fantastic creators and self-publishers, each and every one of them has a table here and has their self-published books available for purchase. So please go and support your local